Here's something that fundamentally changes your understanding of the Iran war. We've all heard about it being America and Israel versus Iran. Bombs, missiles, Strait of Hormuz. All of those things are true, but incomplete. Because while the cameras were pointed at Tehran and Tel Aviv, something else was happening quietly in Moscow, in Beijing, in Riyadh, in Islamabad, and in Ankara. Because wars like this don't simply end. They reshape the world, and everybody wants to influence what the world looks like when the smoke clears. There's one thing about this conflict that almost nobody has talked about: the timing. According to the Washington Post, President Trump launched the strikes on Iran after a weeks-long lobbying campaign by two governments. One of them was, of course, Israel. The other was Saudi Arabia. Allegedly, the Saudi crown prince had been making multiple phone calls privately to Trump in the previous month, not to urge diplomacy, but to urge an attack. Let that sink in. The same Saudi Arabia that publicly supported the diplomatic process, the same Saudi Arabia whose foreign ministry was releasing statements about the importance of negotiation and regional stability. Apparently, its leader was privately telling the American president to go to war with Iran. The Saudi embassy in Washington formally denied the Washington Post report, but there is a detail that makes the Saudi position somewhat complicated. According to Middle East Eye, American Senator Lindsey Graham traveled to Riyadh in late February specifically to bring Mohammed bin Salman on board with the strike plan. Mohammed bin Salman did not vehemently oppose it, but simultaneously, according to separate reporting, he was conveying reassurances to Iran's president that Saudi Arabia would not permit its airspace or territory to be used for attacks against Iran. From what we have so far, Saudi Arabia was telling America to go ahead and also telling Iran not to worry about them. Then came the part that Riyadh was suspecting but hadn't fully planned for. Within hours of the start of the war, Iran launched its retaliatory attacks, among other targets, at Riyadh. Saudi Foreign Ministry condemned the strikes in the strongest possible terms, but it said nothing about the American or the Israeli strikes that practically began the war. But there's a second layer to the Saudi story that even the Saudis haven't probably considered. What happens to Saudi Arabia when the world stops needing oil? Every barrel sitting unshipped in a tanker outside the Strait of Hormuz is a reminder that Saudi Arabia's entire national identity rests on a commodity that the world is slowly moving away from. This war accelerates that anxiety. The faster oil prices spike, the faster governments and corporations invest in alternatives, and the more seriously the world talks about energy independence. Saudi Arabia wanted to weaken Iran, but it may have simultaneously accelerated its own long-term irrelevance. Let's talk Russia. President Putin condemned the strikes as a cynical violation of international law and sovereignty. Russia's UN ambassador called for an immediate emergency Security Council session. All of that is Russia's official position. Here's what Russia was actually doing. Russia was providing Iran with real-time intelligence during the conflict. Satellite feeds showing the positions of American warships, data on US aircraft movement patterns, making Iran's retaliatory strikes more precise and more dangerous. When asked directly whether Putin was helping Iran, Trump told Fox News, "I think he might be helping them a little bit, yeah." And in the same breath, he excused it.
You think Putin is helping them?
I think he might be helping them a little bit, yeah, I guess. And he probably thinks we're helping Ukraine, right?
And you are, right?
Yeah, we're helping them also. And so he says that. And China would say the same thing. You know, it's like, hey, they do it and we do it, in all fairness. They do it and we do it.
But Russia's role in this war is more layered, because Russia is gaining from this war in ways that have nothing to do with Iran directly. First and foremost, oil. Russia's 2026 budget was built around an assumed oil price of roughly $59 a barrel. Within days after the closure of Strait of Hormuz, Brent crude climbed well above that threshold and kept climbing. Every day the strait stays closed, Russia becomes richer. Every barrel that cannot leave the Gulf is a blessing for Russian economy. Secondly, Ukraine. The Iran war consumed Western diplomatic effort, media attention, and American military resources almost overnight. Russia quietly intensified its missile campaign against Ukrainian cities in late February, the heaviest sustained bombardment in years, and the world barely noticed. Thirdly, and this is the most nuanced bit, Russia is watching how this war ends with extraordinary interest, because the lesson that every country on earth is drawing from watching Iran get struck is simple. Only nuclear weapons make you invincible. Russia's foreign minister said it explicitly and publicly. More countries drawing that conclusion is not a bad outcome from Moscow's perspective. Of all the players in this conflict, China's position is perhaps the most interesting. On the one hand, China purchases 87% of Iran's oil exports. It has a comprehensive strategic partnership with Tehran worth hundreds of billions of dollars. It condemned American strikes at the UN. Its foreign minister condemned the killing of Khamenei. China is one of Iran's most important allies and protectors. But on the other hand, China gets roughly 45% of its total oil imports through the Strait of Hormuz. The strait's closure is causing real pain to Chinese economy. China had spent the months before the conflict quietly building up strategic oil reserves, a sign that Beijing saw the conflict coming, but reserves have their own limits. So here's what China did. China pressed Tehran not to disrupt the Qatari LNG tankers, which supply roughly 30% of China's LNG imports. Beijing's message was essentially, you can close the strait to Americans and Europeans, but let our ships through. And Iran agreed. Iranian flagged tankers carrying Iranian oil continued moving through the strait throughout the conflict, all of them heading to China. But China's maneuvering runs even deeper than oil logistics, because Iran made an announcement in March that most Western news coverage largely missed. Ships seeking safe passage through the Strait of Hormuz might need to pay for their cargo in Chinese yuan, not US dollars. This is massive. This is a direct challenge to the petrodollar system, the 50-year arrangement by which all oil in the world is bought and sold in American dollars, which is the foundational pillar of American global financial dominance. So even if a handful of tankers choose to settle their transactions in yuan instead of dollars, it creates a precedent. China has been trying to destroy dollar dominance for years, through alternative payment infrastructure, through yuan-dominated oil contracts with Gulf states. The chaos at Hormuz just handed Beijing a live public experiment in what a post-dollar oil market could look like. Among other countries, the one country you weren't expecting to hear about is Taiwan. Now, Taiwan has said almost nothing publicly, but its military planners are reported to have been watching this conflict with extraordinary intensity. That's because Taiwan sits on its own strait, and it has learned a massive lesson from Iran that a weaker power can threaten global economy by blocking a narrow waterway far more effectively than anyone expected. That lesson has direct implications for any future conflict over the Taiwan Strait. Pakistan condemned both the American strikes on Iran and Iran's retaliatory strikes on Arab states simultaneously. Pakistan is walking a tightrope between its relationships with Iran, Saudi Arabia, China, and the United States, and it is doing so with characteristic Pakistani diplomatic dexterity. Turkey took a similar position. Turkey's territory was struck by Iranian missiles, and a Turkish-owned ship was one of the few foreign vessels to transit the strait. Turkey refused to allow US operations from its soil, maintaining just enough distance from Washington to keep lines open to Moscow, Tehran, and Beijing simultaneously. So, who actually holds the board? The honest answer is nobody. Not yet, possibly not for years. The United States struck Iran with overwhelming force and achieved its immediate military objectives, but it is now managing a war it cannot easily end, a strait it cannot fully reopen, and a coalition it cannot fully assemble. Australia, Japan, and the United Kingdom, America's closest allies, declined to help US opening up the Strait of Hormuz. Spain refused to allow its bases to be used for Iran operations. Israel achieved what it had sought for over a decade, a degraded Iranian nuclear program and a dead supreme leader, but a Khamenei has been replaced by another Khamenei, albeit a more disgruntled one. Whether the new supreme leader will be more pragmatic or more aggressive, nobody knows. The one thing that every serious analyst across the political spectrum agrees on is this: that the Middle East that exists on the other side of this conflict will look fundamentally different from the one that existed before February 28, 2026. The alliances will be redrawn, the price of energy repriced, the meaning of nuclear deterrence reconsidered, the credibility of diplomacy, of international law, of American guarantees, all of it up for reassessment by every government on earth. The cameras were pointed at Iran, but the game was never just about Iran.